You sense it before you name it. A quiet disturbance moving beneath the surface of your thoughts. Not loud enough to demand attention, not gentle enough to be ignored. It arrives as a subtle pressure, like air shifting before a storm you cannot yet see. You were standing somewhere familiar, inside the habits of your own mind, and suddenly the ground feels thinner. Something has leaned in from the depths, and the old balance no longer holds. You notice how the world still looks the same, yet it no longer meets you in the same way. Words feel flatter. Explanations feel insufficient. The structures that once held meaning begin to sound hollow, as if they are repeating themselves without listening. You are not broken, but you are no longer sealed. A fissure has opened, and through it comes a presence that does not ask for permission. It does not announce itself as insight or truth. It comes first as unease, a sense that your attention has been pulled away from the surface and turned inward, against your will. You may feel it when silence stretches too long, or when noise suddenly feels unbearable. You may feel it when certainty begins to tire you, when answers arrive too quickly and leave nothing alive behind them. You stand at a threshold you did not plan to cross. Behind you lies a world that explains, categorizes, predicts. Ahead of you there is no clear path, only the sensation of depth. The mind wants to turn back, to restore clarity, to rebuild control. But something else within you has already stepped forward, listening to a different rhythm. Images begin to flicker, not yet clear enough to grasp. A door that is not fully closed. A mirror that reflects more than your face. A forest at dusk, dense and breathing, where paths dissolve as soon as you try to follow them. These images do not arrive to be understood. They arrive because they insist on being seen. You might feel a quiet grief here, though you cannot say what has been lost. Perhaps it is the loss of simplicity, or the loss of believing that consciousness belongs entirely to your will. You begin to sense that there are movements within you that do not answer to your plans, forces that think in images rather than arguments. They do not oppose you, but they do not obey you either. Breath becomes noticeable. Each inhale feels like crossing a small boundary, each exhale like letting go of something unnamed. You are still here, still yourself, yet the center you once trusted has shifted slightly to the side. The ego listens now, not as a master, but as a witness unsure of what it is about to hear. This is not the beginning of understanding. It is the beginning of contact, a moment where the light you rely on grows dim enough for shadows to speak, where the noise of explanation softens and something older starts to move. You are not being guided, you are being invited, and the invitation is simple, though not easy. To remain present at the edge, to stay with the tension without resolving it, to allow what rises from within to take shape in its own time. The door has already opened. The descent has already begun. You move further in, though nothing moves in a straight line. The descent is not a fall but a thickening. The air grows heavier, richer with meaning that cannot be sorted or named. What once felt like background noise now steps forward, carrying weight and intention. Thoughts slow down, not because they are silenced, but because something deeper has begun to speak in a different language. Here, the psyche does not present itself as an idea. It appears as landscape. You find yourself walking through inner terrain that feels both ancient and immediate. A forest presses in from all sides, its trees tall and indifferent, their roots tangled beneath the soil in patterns no eye could trace. Light filters through in fragments, never enough to illuminate the whole. You realize that seeing everything at once was never the point. Voices begin to emerge, not as words you can quote, but as tonal shifts within you. One voice insists on clarity, on definition, on the safety of edges and borders. Another moves more slowly, circling rather than advancing, speaking through images and moods. They do not argue. They coexist in tension, like fire and shadow sharing the same space without merging. You feel how often you have sided with the voice that names and orders. How much of your identity has been built around control, prediction, explanation. It once served you. It still does. But here, in this inner descent, its reach feels limited. Every attempt to dominate the scene flattens it, drains it of vitality. The forest resists being turned into a map. A river appears, dark and steady, cutting through the terrain without concern for your questions. You sense that it has been flowing long before you noticed it. Feelings move like this river. They do not ask what you think of them. They do not explain themselves. They carry information in temperature, in pressure, in direction. You realize how rarely you have listened to them without translating them into conclusions. As you stand near the water, memories surface not as stories but as sensations. A tightening in the chest, a warmth behind the eyes, a familiar heaviness that once demanded action, achievement, distraction. Now it only asks to be felt. You notice how quickly the mind wants to intervene, to label, to fix, to turn experience into theory. The urge is strong, almost automatic, but the descent does not reward speed. Each time you rush forward, the ground seems to slip. Each time you pause, the scene deepens. You begin to understand that this realm does not respond to force. It responds to presence. The more you allow yourself to remain with what is unclear, the more it reveals its texture. Figures move at the edge of perception, not characters in a story, but presences that carry emotional gravity. One feels stern and watchful, guarding thresholds you did not know existed. Another feels wounded, raw, holding something you have avoided for years. They are not enemies. They are parts of a whole that has never been fully acknowledged. Fire appears here too, not as destruction but as process. A slow burning that transforms without announcing results. You feel it working through old identifications, consuming certainties that once defined you. The heat is uncomfortable, but it is not cruel. It burns what no longer moves, what has become rigid, what blocks circulation. You sense how consciousness here follows different laws. Cause and effect blur. Time folds inward. Past and present overlap in ways that feel strangely intimate. The ego struggles to orient itself. It wants markers, progress, reassurance. None are offered. Instead, there is an invitation to tolerate ambiguity, to stay with paradox without resolving it. A mirror stands somewhere in this inner space. When you approach it, you do not see a single face. Images shift. Expressions change. You recognize parts of yourself you once rejected, others you inflated, others you never allowed into view. The mirror does not judge. It reflects. And in that reflection, you feel both exposed and strangely whole. This is where the descent asks something of you. Not belief, not surrender. Attention. The kind of attention that does not dissect or dominate. The kind that listens without deciding in advance what should be heard. You begin to sense that consciousness is not confined to the narrow beam you call awareness. It extends downward, outward, inward, into regions that think and feel in ways you were never taught to trust. The forest, the river, the fire, the mirror. They do not resolve into meaning yet. They repeat themselves, echoing through different layers of experience. Each return adds depth, not clarity. You feel disoriented, but also strangely accompanied, as if something within you recognizes this terrain, even if your mind does not. You remain there, suspended between knowing and unknowing, between the voice that demands mastery and the presence that asks for relationship. The descent does not promise answers. It offers contact, and in that contact, something begins to shift, quietly, patiently, preparing the ground for what can only emerge from within the tension itself. You begin to notice how the tension itself has a shape. It is not chaos. It breathes. It expands and contracts like a living thing. When you stop trying to escape it, when you allow it to remain unresolved, it reveals a strange order that does not belong to logic. It belongs to rhythm. You feel it in the body first, before any thought arrives to name it. There is a weight in the chest that feels familiar. You have carried it for years, mistaking it for responsibility or ambition or fatigue. Here, stripped of its disguises, it shows itself as longing. Not desire for something specific, but a deeper pull toward wholeness you never learned how to articulate. It is the ache of something unfinished, something that refuses to be reduced to achievement. Images surface again, repeating but altered. The forest is still there, but now you notice the ground beneath your feet. It is uneven, layered with old leaves and hidden roots. Every step requires attention. You cannot rush without stumbling. This is how inner movement happens. Slowly, through sensation rather than decision. A door appears in the distance. It looks ordinary at first, almost disappointing. No symbols carved into it, no guardian standing watch. Just a door closed waiting. You feel the familiar impulse to open it, to see what lies beyond, to complete the image. But something holds you back. Not fear, but a quiet understanding that the door is not meant to be opened yet. Instead, you sit with it. You feel the tension of not acting, of resisting the urge to resolve. The ego shifts in its seat, restless, uncomfortable with waiting. Yet in this stillness, something else begins to stir. A subtle perception that the door is not blocking access. It is teaching restraint, teaching relationship rather than conquest. A voice emerges not as sound, but as attitude. It carries authority without force. It does not command. It observes. You sense that this voice has watched you for a long time, has seen you mistake motion for meaning, explanation for understanding. It does not accuse. It simply remains present, holding the space open. The river returns closer now. You notice how it reflects the sky above it, though the water itself is dark. Light dances on its surface without penetrating its depths. You realize that much of your conscious life has been lived on that surface, chasing reflections, mistaking brightness for depth. Here, the invitation is different. To let the gaze sink, to feel rather than interpret. Memories arise again, but this time they are not personal stories. They are patterns, reactions that repeat themselves across different moments in your life. The way you withdraw when closeness becomes real. The way you intellectualize pain to keep it at a distance. The way you cling to certainty when uncertainty threatens your identity. Seeing these patterns does not dissolve them. It simply brings them into the field of awareness. Fire glows nearby, low and steady. It does not flare. It does not demand sacrifice. It waits. You sense that this fire is not here to destroy you, but to temper you, to soften what has hardened, to make movement possible where rigidity once ruled. The heat is gentle but persistent. You cannot ignore it without effort. The mirror returns too, though you do not approach it directly this time. You sense its presence behind you, reflecting not your face, but your posture. How you stand in relation to yourself. How often you turn away from what feels vulnerable. How quickly you assume control when uncertainty arises. The mirror shows you not who you are, but how you relate. You begin to feel the emergence of a new attitude. Not confidence, not surrender, a willingness to remain in dialogue, to allow the unknown to speak without rushing to translate it. This willingness feels fragile, easily disrupted by old habits. Yet it is real. It has weight. It changes how the inner space responds to you. The forest seems less hostile now, though no path has appeared. The river continues its flow, indifferent yet nourishing. The door remains closed, patient. You sense that nothing here is waiting for you to solve it. Everything is waiting for you to stay. And in staying, something subtle happens. The tension no longer feels like an obstacle. It feels like a field, a space where opposites can exist without canceling each other, where consciousness does not collapse into certainty or confusion, but stretches slowly, learning to hold more than it once could. You remain there, breathing with the images, letting them work on you without demand. The descent continues, not downward but inward, circling the same terrain from a slightly different angle, preparing the ground for another turn in the spiral that has only just begun to reveal itself. The movement continues without announcing itself. You realize there was no clear boundary between where you were and where you are now. The shift happened quietly, like a change in light that only becomes visible once it has already taken place. The inner space feels denser, more intimate, as if the symbols have drawn closer to you, no longer content to remain at a distance. You notice how the body responds before the mind does. A slight tightening in the throat, a warmth spreading through the chest, breath deepening on its own, slower now, more deliberate. These sensations do not ask for interpretation. They are already speaking. You begin to sense that this language has always been available to you, but you learned early on to distrust it. The forest opens just enough to reveal a clearing. It is not empty. It is held. The trees stand at the edges like witnesses, their presence steady, unintrusive. In the center there is nothing you can grasp, yet you feel drawn to remain there. The absence itself feels meaningful. A space where something could appear or not. Both possibilities feel equally alive. A figure takes shape at the edge of awareness. Not a character you could describe, but a posture, an orientation toward life. It carries the weight of judgment you have imposed on yourself over years. The expectations you absorbed. The standards you tried to embody. This figure does not attack you. It watches. Its gaze feels heavy because it is familiar. You realize how often you have mistaken this presence for truth. How readily you allowed it to define worth, direction, identity. Here, in this inner clearing, its authority feels less absolute. Not because it has weakened, but because something else has entered the field. A quieter presence that does not compete, does not argue, yet subtly shifts the balance. The river's sound grows clearer. You do not see it at first, but you hear it moving beneath the ground like a pulse. It carries emotion without narrative, grief without story, joy without explanation. You sense how much energy you have spent trying to give these movements a rational form, believing that only then could they be legitimate. Fire flickers again, reflecting in the shadows of the trees. This time it illuminates faces you recognize and do not recognize at once. Past selves, possible selves, aspects you disowned because they did not fit the image you needed to survive. The fire does not force them forward. It simply makes their outlines visible, inviting acknowledgement rather than correction. You feel the temptation to choose, to decide which parts belong and which should be left behind. But the inner space resists this division. It does not operate on exclusion. It operates on inclusion without agreement. Everything that appears here has a reason for being present, even if that reason remains opaque. The mirror shifts position. It is no longer behind you. It stands slightly to the side, catching reflections at angles you are not used to seeing. You glimpse expressions that surprise you. Softness where you expected hardness. Fear where you believed there was strength. Curiosity where you assumed indifference. The reflection unsettles you because it refuses to confirm a fixed identity. You begin to understand that the self is not an object you can locate. It is a movement, a field of relations constantly reorganizing itself. The ego feels this instability as threat, yet another part of you senses it as relief. A release from the burden of having to be one thing, one story, one conclusion. The clearing does not fill with revelation. It remains open, but your relationship to openness changes. What once felt like lack now feels like potential. Not potential for achievement, but potential for encounter. You sense that something within you is learning to wait without withdrawing, to remain present without grasping. This waiting has texture. It is not passive. It requires attention, patience, humility. You notice how often your mind tries to slip back into control, to narrate what is happening, to claim insight prematurely. Each time it does, the scene grows thinner. Each time you release that impulse, the space deepens again. The symbols continue their quiet work. The forest breathes. The river flows unseen. The fire glows without consuming. The mirror reflects without fixing. You are no longer moving toward something. You are being held within a process that does not need your direction. And in this holding, something subtle but undeniable takes root. A trust not in answers, but in the dialogue itself. A recognition that consciousness is not something you possess, but something you participate in. The descent continues, not as loss, but as deepening intimacy with what has always been moving beneath the surface of your awareness. You feel the spiral tighten, not as pressure, but as focus. The same images return, yet they no longer stand apart from you. They seem to move through you, as if the boundary between observer and landscape has grown thinner. You are not watching the inner world anymore. You are standing inside its pulse, feeling how it organizes itself without consulting your preferences. The forest no longer feels like a place you enter. It feels like a condition of being. Its density mirrors the density of your own interior life, layered, living, resistant to shortcuts. You sense how often you have tried to rise above this density, to escape it through abstraction or distance. Here, elevation offers nothing. Only presence allows movement. The door appears again, unchanged, still closed. Yet your response to it has altered. There is no urge to open it now. No impatience. You feel how the door has become a center of gravity rather than an obstacle. It gathers tension around itself, holds it, gives it form. You understand without words that some thresholds exist to teach orientation, not passage. You stand before it and notice your breath aligning with something deeper. Inhale draws you inward. Exhale releases the demand to know. The rhythm steadies. You sense that this rhythm has always been there, guiding you beneath the noise of intention. It feels older than thought, older than identity. The river emerges fully this time. You see it clearly, dark yet luminous, carrying reflections that shift with every movement of light. You kneel beside it without deciding to do so. The water does not show you answers. It shows you continuity. Feeling flows into feeling, moment into moment, without needing to be justified. You realize how much of your suffering came from trying to interrupt this flow. Memories rise again, but now they arrive softened. Not stripped of their charge, but held within a wider field. Pain is still pain. Loss is still loss. Yet they no longer demand defense or explanation. They exist as part of a larger movement that includes resilience, adaptation, quiet endurance. You feel how the psyche does not seek comfort, but balance through inclusion. The fire brightens slightly, enough to warm, but not to overwhelm. It touches the edges of old convictions, melting their sharpness. You feel beliefs loosening, not collapsing, but becoming permeable. The heat does not annihilate structure. It restores flexibility. You sense how rigidity once protected you, and how it now limits circulation. A presence settles near you, neither inside nor outside. It does not speak. It does not instruct. Its awareness feels wide, patient, unhurried. You recognize it not by familiarity, but by resonance. Something in you relaxes in its proximity, as if no performance is required. The ego does not disappear here. It listens. The mirror appears one last time in this cycle, though it no longer startles you. When you look, you do not search for definition. You observe movement, subtle shifts in expression, the way uncertainty now carries less threat. The way not knowing has begun to feel like a space you can inhabit rather than escape. You're not seeing a new self. You're seeing a changing relationship. You notice how the symbols no longer demand interpretation. They work through repetition, through return, through variation. Each encounter alters the field slightly, deepening rather than resolving it. You understand now that revelation does not arrive as conclusion. It arrives as capacity, the capacity to remain with complexity without fragmentation. The spiral completes another turn, though nothing announces completion. You are not above where you were before. You are inside it differently. The descent has not ended. It has slowed, thickened, become more intimate. You feel less urgency to move forward, less need to escape backward. You remain there, held between light and shadow, between movement and stillness. Consciousness does not clarify itself. It opens, and in that opening, you sense that the work is not to master the depths, but to live in conversation with them, allowing each return to reshape you quietly, patiently, without finality. The movement gathers itself without rising toward a peak. It deepens instead, like a breath that goes farther than you expected, touching places that have remained untouched for years. You feel how the symbols you have encountered are no longer separate moments. They are interwoven now, forming a living field that surrounds and permeates you at once. The forest is no longer dense in the same way. It has not thinned, but your eyes have adjusted. You sense depth rather than obstruction. The darkness between the trees feels inhabited, not threatening. Shadow reveals itself as a form of intimacy, a closeness to life that light alone could never provide. You recognize how often you once equated visibility with truth, forgetting how much of life grows unseen. The river flows openly now, its sound steady and unbroken. You notice how it does not rush toward an end. It moves because movement is its nature. Feelings work like this. They are not problems to be solved, but currents to be entered with awareness. You feel how resisting them once fragmented your attention, scattering energy into avoidance and control. Now, allowing them to pass through you restores coherence without effort. Fire hums softly at the edges of perception. Its warmth is no longer about change alone, but about continuity. It sustains the process rather than accelerating it. You sense that transformation here is not dramatic. It is cumulative. It happens through repeated contact, through staying present long enough for the psyche to reorganize itself around what it can now tolerate. The door remains, still closed, still central. But now you understand that the door is not between you and something else. It is between different attitudes within you. On one side, urgency, mastery, certainty. On the other, patience, listening, relationship. The door does not open because the work is not about crossing. It is about learning where to stand. A temple emerges gradually, not built of stone, but of attention. It forms wherever you remain long enough without fleeing into explanation. Its walls are made of breath, of pauses that stretch without breaking. Inside this space, nothing is demanded of you. There is no ritual to perform, no insight to extract. Presence itself becomes the offering. You sense a quiet alignment taking place. Not alignment toward perfection, but toward honesty. The ego no longer tries to dominate the field. It does not dissolve either. It learns a different posture, upright but receptive, active but not controlling. You feel how this shift changes everything without announcing change. Light moves differently here. It does not illuminate objects. It reveals relations. How shadow gives depth to form. How silence gives shape to sound. How uncertainty allows perception to remain alive. You begin to sense that clarity is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to see within it without panic. Memories pass through again, but they no longer cling. They touch, resonate, then move on. You feel gratitude for the fact that they can do so, for the way the psyche, when not forced into resolution, knows how to regulate its own intensity. You sense how much suffering arose not from pain itself, but from resistance to its movement. The mirror no longer stands apart. Reflection happens internally now, as awareness observing itself without division. You notice thoughts forming and dissolving, emotions rising and fading, images appearing and retreating. None claim ownership. None demand identification. You remain present as the field in which they occur. This presence feels quiet, but it is not empty. It hums with life, with potential, with ongoing dialogue. You sense the self here not as a figure, but as an organizing principle that holds opposites without collapsing into either. It does not promise harmony. It sustains tension without fragmentation. The spiral continues its motion. You feel its rhythm rather than tracking its direction. Each return carries familiarity, yet no repetition feels exact. You are not accumulating knowledge. You are refining sensitivity, the ability to notice subtle shifts, the capacity to remain in contact without retreating into certainty. There is a moment where everything feels held at once. Forest, river, fire, door, temple. Not merged, not resolved, but coexisting in a balanced tension that feels strangely restful. You do not try to preserve it. You sense that grasping would break the spell. Instead, you breathe and allow it to pass through you like a quiet current. As the intensity begins to soften, not diminish but settle, you recognize that this was never about reaching a height. It was about learning how to dwell in depth, how to stay with what lives beneath explanation without losing orientation. The crescendo dissolves into stillness, not as an ending, but as a return to a quieter rhythm that can accompany you beyond this inner space. You remain present, aware that something has shifted, though you cannot summarize it, and you sense that you do not need to. The dialogue continues, alive and unfinished, waiting only for your willingness to keep listening. You do not leave this place. It loosens its grip instead, like a hand that no longer needs to hold tightly. What remains is not an image you can recall at will, but a tone that lingers beneath your thoughts. A quiet resonance that accompanies you as attention begins to turn outward again, without fully abandoning what has been touched. The forest does not recede. It learns how to travel with you. You sense it in moments when language feels thin, when explanations arrive too quickly, when certainty tries to close what wants to stay open. In those moments, the density returns as a reminder, not a threat, an invitation to slow down, to feel the ground before deciding where to step. The river continues to flow, whether you attend to it or not. You feel it most clearly when emotion rises without a clear cause, when a mood settles in and refuses to justify itself. Instead of asking what it means, you allow it to move. You let it carry information in its own way, trusting that feeling knows paths the intellect cannot trace. Fire stays with you as warmth rather than urgency. It no longer pushes for change. It sustains attention. You notice how this warmth softens rigidity when you allow it, how it keeps inner movement possible even in times of fatigue or doubt. Transformation, you realize, does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly through continued contact. The door remains exactly where it is. You no longer feel compelled to open it. You understand now that its presence is enough. It marks a difference in orientation, a choice that does not need to be resolved once and for all. Each moment offers it again, not as a decision, but as a posture toward experience. The mirror no longer confronts you. It accompanies you. Reflection happens in the background, gently, without interrogation. You notice yourself noticing. You feel thoughts arise and dissolve without needing to claim them. You sense emotions move through you without demanding ownership. Awareness becomes less about control and more about relationship. There is no final integration, no completed synthesis. What is shifted is subtle and ongoing. The ego has learned how to listen without disappearing. The self has not revealed itself as an image, but as a field that holds you when certainty falls away. You sense how this relationship will need tending, not mastery. Silence feels different now. Not empty, not threatening. It carries texture. You recognize it as a space where the dialogue continues, even when words stop. You do not strain to hear it. You allow it to remain present, trusting that it will speak again when needed. You move forward, or perhaps simply continue, without marking an end. The descent does not close. The spiral does not complete itself. It turns again and again, each time familiar, each time slightly altered. You sense that this movement will accompany you through ordinary moments, through confusion, through clarity, without demanding resolution. And so you remain in quiet communion with what has no final name. Attentive, receptive, willing to stay in dialogue. The presence does not withdraw. It waits patiently within you, ready to be met again whenever you are willing to listen without needing to conclude.